Good morning, everyone. My name is Razi Somia, and I'll be doing the opening remarks in today's dialogue. Today, we meet in a very, very interesting times where South Africa is currently in the process of a transition towards a seventh administration as an outcome of the previous democratic elections in South Africa, where the ruling African National Congress, for the first time in 30 years of democratic history, dropped below 50%. And the African National Congress, one of the few liberation movement who actually conceded towards the electoral defeat, decides on its own accord to form a government of national unity. This has bucked the trend historically when we have seen what has happened throughout the region, where we have seen democratic deficits within countries such as Zimbabwe and Swaziland, and we have seen a rise in instability as young people feel frustrated at the formal political processes. And this is why we convene today. We convene to not only unpack the outcomes of South Africa's general elections in 2024, but what are the implications to South Africa's foreign policy position towards the region? And how do we now take those lessons and how does it now project towards the rest of the SADC region and the international community and the lessons to be learned from South Africa's experience? Today, we have an illustrious panel that will be unpacking from their various perspectives of experts and civil society actors on what are their perspectives of South Africa's general elections and what are the lessons that can be learned from the region. And also, we will also be trying to synthesize and come up with a way forward and how can we build consensus and a greater international solidarity amongst international actors for the evolving situations in both eSwatini and Zimbabwe. I would like to thank our developmental partner for today, Olof Palmer Center, for making this dialogue happen. And I would like to hand over to the captain of today's dialogue, Mundrozi Mutaniri, who will be steering the ship and bringing on the various speakers to converse about this very important topic. Over to you, Mundrozi. Oh,
thank you.
One more reminder: this meeting will be recorded and live streamed, and I'd like for everyone to continue to participate and prepare questions near the end of the dialogue. Apologies for that, Mundrozi. Over to you.
No, thank you, Comrade Raza. I think it's an important piece of information that had to be given out. That this is a public dialogue. And that it will be live streamed on our Facebook page, but also as many people as possible will join on this platform. But let me, as Lwazi has already done it, just welcome you all to yet another SALO dialogue. As Lwazi has already expressed, we endeavor to put as much information on the table for as many actors as possible, hear different voices, and the hope is that we can all try and find each other and build consensus on a number of issues that we all grapple with in our individual organizations, in our individual capacities, and try and see how we can feed on each other's energies and strategies to really build a broader consensus and try to move the needle towards a more open, more democratic, more inclusive society, but also addressing the challenges we face, building stable and peaceful environments in our individual countries. And I think that I don't have to say a lot because Comrade Lwazi has already expressed why we are here. So today we're focusing on the South African election. But we want to hear regional perspectives on this particular election, especially the fact that the government makeup, even though ANC-led, will include other actors who have not been in government for a very long time. And we want to try and discuss and sort of look at what the potential impact of all these things. Firstly, the election outcome, the government of national unity, what kind of an impact is that going to have on South Africa's foreign policy, on South Africa's positions on regional issues, especially for today, or in particular for today, the issue of Swaziland and the issue of Zimbabwe. where we all know that historically South Africa has played a significant role. I think in Zimbabwe, it has been the SADC mandated facilitator for a long time. Part of that culminated into the signing of a government of national unity in 2009 after the not so elections of June 2008. We also know that when the massacre in Swaziland, July 2021 happened, South Africa, which was chairing the SADC Troika at the time, had to lead different teams, of course, starting with Botswana. Then when President Ramaphosa was chair of SADC, sent in an envoy, and there's been a lot of role playing by South Africa on the Swaziland question. But we also know that a number of actors in South Africa, the SACP, the labor movement, COSATU, and many other actors, SASCO, the YCO, and many other actors have already been working on this question of Swaziland. And part of why we want to look at this is to try and discuss what's likely to change. What are we likely to see happening on these two questions of Zimbabwe and Swaziland? But more importantly, hear from comrades from Swaziland, comrades from Zimbabwe, and comrades from across the region on what their expectations would be. What is it that they would want to see happening in terms of addressing some of the long-standing issues in these individual countries? I think that Comrade Lwazi highlighted that one of the key lessons we got from South Africa when the election results came out the way they came out was the idea that people just know that they had to sit down and negotiate and talk. It's not always the case in Swaziland or in Zimbabwe that without external pressure, actors would just say, guys, this is where we are, let's sit down and talk. And part of the lessons that we draw, I think speakers will touch on that. And so I won't say much because we have experts on this particular topic, people who have been part of trying to address some of these challenges for a long time. And I want to start with my sister and comrade Mary Da Silva, who I know needs no introduction to many of us on this platform. Comrade Mary, please do come in and give us your perspectives on this topic, but also I think from you, want to hear more on what your expectations or the asks would be to the new government of national unity and the entirety of the SADC region.
Thank you, Comrade Mujozi, and as usual, thank you for providing a platform for human rights defenders like myself to speak on the situation in our respective countries. As Swazis, of course, we watched with keen interest the elections in South Africa, particularly coming from a country whose election process is so flawed that they're not credible and do not conform to international and regional standards. The outcome was quite surprising. We expected the ANC, we didn't expect the ANC to lose so much in terms of, the voter percentage. And for us, it's a testament of, the democratic will of the people of South Africa in exercising their right to vote, their right to choose their own government. So we've been also watching the government of national unity. We have seen the DA and the Patriotic Alliance. We were hoping that the EFF would make it into the government, particularly because of their political position on the issue of Swaziland and democratic reforms in Swaziland. While the ANC, as a political party, which we've been told many times, has a clear position on Swaziland, a clear policy on Swaziland to provide solidarity and support for democratic reforms to ensure that we become a democratic country that conforms to international and regional standards. But then again, on the flip side, you would get the argument that says the ANC, the government, does not dictate foreign policy, and that has to be an outcome of discussions and an outcome of a parliamentary process. So as you know, Munjozi, I've been in the mass democratic movement for a very long time. I've been a pro-democracy activist for a long time. In 2014, I think we engaged with DIRCO to find out what the position of South Africa, the government, was. And we were told to visit Parliament and to lobby Parliament. So we did engage with the Portfolio Committee on International Relations and Cooperation, where it was clear from the members of the DA at the time that we were in that meeting, and the members of the EFF, that getting that foreign policy out of Parliament would be easy if all political parties were, of course, in agreement. And the stumbling block at that meeting was the ANC, which was not opposing the issue on matters of principle, but it was just a matter of party politics happening and not to be seen agreeing with the DA or the EFF. And so from that, it is clear to us that, with the government of national unity, we have better chances of getting a clear foreign policy coming out of the legislature for the government to enforce. It is up to us as human rights defenders and activists, and up to our regional partners and our South African compatriots to step up the advocacy and make sure that we get the ball running. However, we don't have very high expectations at this moment, because we know that the government will be focusing more on the intricacies of how they will be governing and how they will be sharing power and issues like that. So we possibly should begin the work now, but any outcomes could foreseeably be in the next 2 to 3 years for us to see anything positive coming out of that. So yeah, I think for us as human rights defenders and pro-democracy activists coming out of Swaziland, we really would have wanted the EFF to be part of the government, because then our prospects would be higher than what they look like right now, because we know that it's going to be a give and take between the three political parties, sorry. And the only thing that we have seen coming out of the DA recently was during the 2021 unrest, where their president was on record calling on our government to exercise restraint with regards to the brutality by the security forces, but also calling for the government to engage in dialogue with the citizens of the country. So that's a positive that we have seen out of the DA in 2021. Now, the test will be whether this will carry out into the government and whether they will also be pushing that agenda from the government perspective. Having said that, Comrade Munjozi, I think it's important to always acknowledge what has been done. When President Ramaphosa was chairperson of the Troika, he was able to get the King of Swaziland to agree to a negotiation, a national dialogue. However, that didn't happen because there was no political will. But the point is, pressure coming from the right people in the right positions at the right time can yield results. And it is for us to make sure that we step up the advocacy, we step up the lobbying, we establish relationships with the relevant people within the relevant political parties to be able to push at party level to ensure that any motions on foreign policy for Swaziland, for Zimbabwe, for other countries in the region are tabled and moved in such a way that we at least see something coming out of the House of Parliament after its completion. So the test will be in the next 5 years how we play our roles as human rights defenders, pro-democracy activists, civil society organizations, and the regional bloc as a whole. Thank you, Comrade Munjozi.
Thank you, Com. I think that that's very important, but also giving us some history in terms of the engagements with South Africa. And I think that's going to be very important to build on the work that has already been done, even as you continue to engage the new actors that will be in government, but also primarily the idea that the government remains an ANC-led government means that the policies of the ANC or the views of the ANC are likely to dominate. So I like the idea that you give a history of the work you have already done on that and the work you keep doing. And the hope, of course, that with more advocacy, more lobbying of the other new actors that will come into government, it might see a convergence by South African actors on what needs to be done in Swaziland. So that's quite good. Thank you so much for the input. I'm sure that people will have questions, people will have asks, or especially for the pro-democracy movement in the mass democratic movement in Swaziland, in terms of what are the next steps in engaging South Africa and the region, and what is it that you want to see. I would have wanted you to touch more on the issues of dialogue and the 5-point plan by the mass democratic movement on what the next steps would be and how South Africa can feed into that process. But thank you so much. I think we'll come back to you. Let me move to Matsidiso to give us your input on where we are and partly build on some of the things that Mary touched on. So please do come in.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to engage with some of, well, you know, young people in general, but some really bright minds in the space of international relations. So I'm coming in here in my capacity as the chairperson for the Budget Justice Coalition, and it is a coalition of civil society organizations. About, I think now we're about 24 organizations, but it's, you know, there's so many members that form part of it, and they're also independent people. And what I say about that is that we are a civil society coalition that is looking at economic justice and the impact of economic policies that that countries pursue on human rights and, on everything else. And so I was really excited to join this discussion because I know with SALO and a lot of the work that you do has to do around regional integration and foreign policy. And now that we're in this context of a coalition government, it could be an opportunity for us, or it is a learning point for us to decenter our country and our context, but and to just promote regional integration, remembering that, there are divisive elements that have been placed, but we're actually united in our struggle and in our pursuit for human rights. That struggle might manifest differently in different parts of the region, and also, it might manifest differently because of various socioeconomic factors that different people have, even within their own country. But I think that by encouraging that unity and a multi-sectoral approach, and not just seeing things in silos of like, that's foreign policy, that's elections, that's healthcare, that's budget, that's fiscal policy, but rather seeing them all work together in advancing the realization of rights for all people in the region. Now, tying this to this coalition environment that we find ourselves in. So the Government of National Unity is, there's a lot of press around it, but, even leading up to it, it's somewhat interesting, but I think even leading up to, after the election outcomes, there's been quite interesting, should I say, media coverage on it, where pro-market commentators were dominating the discussions, especially around economic policy and how we fund human rights in notably in South African context. And while, not to say that your stakeholders are all important, however, sometimes the over-reliance on, or looking at, human, or looking at the market, and much of which is dominated by one socioeconomic class, especially, and also has international participation, but that international relationship is mostly quite like from the Western world, and that's kind of the influence that they have on like how we advance our policies in the country. We think that it's concerning because sometimes that the pursuit of impressing or forming relationships with regions in the world that are so much further, and have a contentious relationship with our country through like colonialism or forms of exploitation in our country, but also on the continent. It's really important to also recognize that there are other aspects, or like other people who are affected by election outcomes. And so that it just feels like there's a division between of South Africa, like it's a tale of two countries, where there's one part of the country that is very much reflected in the election outcomes, and then there's the other part of the country who is potentially becoming more radicalized because of being marginalized. And so with that, I think that it's an interesting climate that we're going to find ourselves in, because we have seen we've seen more what are considered extreme parties gaining more support, parties that have been promoting or even individuals that have been promoting more divisive policy positions that maybe do not align with our constitution, for instance, or our obligations to our country and to to our neighboring countries. And so that's probably one area that we're really concerned about, because as people become more marginalized by the system, I think that it creates, or disenfranchised by the system, it creates more fertile ground for people to become radicalized. Sometimes that radicalization is a good thing, but sometimes people, like, it can also be an opportunity for people to disseminate misinformation, but more scarily disinformation. And then I would like to maybe also reflect on how economic policy impacts our election outcome, because while some of the engagements before me, previous speakers, have praised the election aspect or the democratic project that we have in our country. And it's something that I think often, especially in civil society, I think sometimes we can take that for granted, because I mean, I'm a born free, so that's all we know. It's an accepted part of it. But then, if we rest on our laurels when it comes to the democratic project, we might regress and miss out on and make decisions that don't enhance that democratic outcome. So when I say that, I think a big part of it is one of the concerns that we had as civil society, not just leading up to the election for years, is that we noticed that there have been budget cuts that have been proposed to areas of the budget, but specifically to the IEC. And this was a concern to us because it reduces the funds that are available to do free and fair elections, and to for voter education, to get as many people to participate in this hard-won freedom of political participation. And what we saw is that actually voter turnout has decreased significantly. If I recall correctly, I think 40% of people did not vote, which is really concerning and not the right direction to go towards. And then it also reduces the state's ability to build its capacity to continue to strengthen the democratic project, but also to strengthen that when we engage with other governments within our region. And so, it's a cautionary, that's something that we're really concerned about. And it's supported by an MIT study. So the MIT Press Journal, published a study on budget cuts and the impact on elections, and found that, well, this was in Europe, but they found that in over 200 elections in European countries, which are considered more developed, so there's that that consideration. But it found that when the budget is cut by 1%, there's a 3% increase in extremist or populist political party support, and it also translates into reduced voter turnout, increased voter apathy, which is something that is incredibly concerning because it undermines the democratic project in the country. So I guess talking about this to just bring about like conversations around economic policy and to just say that we should really take it can be scary when there's uncertainty. We've never, I mean, in my life, we've never had like a coalition government in this way. It feels like unprecedented times, but we should be looking at it as an opportunity to also show our government how to work together multi-sectorally. So not just work in our silos, but all come together in advancing the democratic project, but also advancing the realization of human rights. And then also that we should also show set the example by working together across within the region, and not just only looking at what's happening in how the budget affects us, people who are in South Africa, but also to think about what alternatives, what are other countries doing. I know now in the BJC we're starting to work with Botswana. We're trying to expand that regional footprint so that we can all come together and, like I said at the beginning, recognize our shared struggle and really just build and build our capacity as a region to just be to just really create a country that the people of this region deserve, because we just have so much to offer, and it's just a pity that there's all these geopolitical considerations that undermine that. So yeah, I think I'll close off to say that we're trying not to be pessimistic, but rather trying to see opportunities to build back better, but like build back in a very meaningful way. Thank you.
Thanks, Matshidiso. I think that it's important to unpack the local context, which I think you have done for us to try and understand better the South African society itself, the impact and what unfolded in the election results, the challenges that are also very local, which would help us in terms of how South Africa will then be able to engage with the rest of the region and the rest of the world. So I think, thank you so much for that input, which I think will, of course, raise a few questions in the discussions. And while least we are there, I want to ask people to start to prepare for discussions as we go towards the end of our speaker line, panelist line rather, but also we have a chat function. It would be good for people to make it more engaging. Your thoughts, your inputs, please use the chat function. Both those that are on Facebook, you can comment. Those that are on this platform, you can also use the chat function so that the discussion is richer. I want to move very quickly to Jessie Chiota, who is the programs manager for WAUPE, which is Women Academy Leadership and Excellence in Zimbabwe. So Jessie, I know you have been watching the election in South Africa, and you have seen the outcomes. I know a number of civil society actors from Zimbabwe who were part of the monitoring and observation of the elections. But historically, Zimbabwean civil society has engaged and keep engaging with South African actors in terms of how to address the challenges that you continue to face in Zimbabwe, challenges relating to governance, human rights, and all those things. There have been questions around South Africa's role at some particular points. There have been doubts on South Africa's capacity. There is also massive opinions that South Africa has the biggest leverage in terms of moving Zimbabwe towards a more democratic and open society, but also try and talk the Zimbabwean government into respecting issues of human rights. Your thoughts on what we are just witnessing, but also a sense of where do you think things will go? What kind of impact do you think the developments in South Africa are going to have on your acts in terms of prosecuting the struggle for democracy in Zimbabwe, but also what would be your key asks to the new regime in South Africa, of course, still ANC led. Your thoughts, Jesse. Please do come in.
All right. Thank you so much, Mnjozi. Please confirm you can hear me.
Quite loud and clear.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for having me on this platform. So I think my contribution is going to be a bit generic. I'll just focus on the lessons learned and obviously areas of interest when it comes to the South African election, because I work at the Women's Academy and we're very invested in women's participation because, South Africa is one of our biggest influences. It's one of the biggest economies on the continent. And so the outcome of this election is going to have a ripple effect. So we're very much invested in that. Firstly, I'd like to start by saying that I think the election that South Africa had is a great indicator of the progress of democracy within South Africa. The country has been independent for about 30 years now, and it has seen 5 presidents so far. We haven't heard of any contested elections. We haven't come across any international and regional observer mission reports that were negative. And I think South Africa has really set the standard with the last election. And this is not to say that the process was not without its glitches. I mean, I was glued to my social media when the country went for polling day, and obviously there were a lot of news reports coming out, but for the most part, and also just generally comparing it with our election that we had last year, South Africa did really well and they set a standard. And I think the next countries that are having the elections, I think Mozambique is having one in October. I think they really can learn something from it. And Zimbabwe as well, because we're already talking about 2028. And then on the quality of the election, I feel that one of the major demerits that the previous speaker mentioned was the low voter turnout. And then obviously the decline in the women's participation. I think South Africa's had 46% of seats in parliament occupied by women. This is 2019. And then after this election, it's dropped to about 43%. And I think it can be attributed to ANC's loss of parliamentary seats, because I know the ANC has always been strong when it comes to gender equality and inclusion. So it's not so much of a shocking factor compared to what we're battling in Zimbabwe, where we have women who make up 52% of the country's population, but then they only occupy 10% of parliamentary seats. So I think there's something to be learned there as well. And then other than that, I also feel that this election showed the major benefits of using the proportional representation voting system as compared to the one that we use in Zimbabwe, the first past the post electoral system, which we have seen, and I think the world has seen, to be a major cause of polarization. And so I think that since right now as WALPE, we are campaigning for a change of the voting system, reflecting on the South African election also gives us leverage. It strengthens our argument when we argue that it's time for us to change our voting system. And then on the issue of foreign policies, I think that the parties forming the GNU, they have very different policy principles, to my understanding, especially the ANC and the DA, and also just considering their historic differences and, the number of issues that they've had, which have been a cause for tension in the nation. They have very different policies, but then them just joining hands to form those coalition is a serious commitment and achievement for South Africa. And I think if we look at the current rate of the rand against the dollar right now, is a great indicator of how successful the coalition could be. So I think that this GNU is going to go one of two ways. Either it's going to work out and be really incredibly successful, or it's going to fail dismally, because again, like I said, there are a lot of differences that can be traced back to South African history. And so that will potentially cause a rift within the nation. And then what I find worrying about the position on the foreign policy of the different parties is that the ANC recently stood their ground on the position that they will not be, sending foreigners back home. I recently read that was it the Constitutional Court I can't remember who, but apparently they said that the Zimbabwean exemption permit will stay. However, it's also my understanding that the Democratic Alliance and the Patriotic Alliance are not exactly on the same page when it comes to issues of foreigners and, the Home Affairs. I think Gayton Mackenzie has been very vocal about his position and, how he's fighting and lobbying very hard for the Home Affairs portfolio. So that in itself is something of a major scare for us, because there are a lot of Zimbabweans living in South Africa, and should the coalition decide to sit down and then, be on the same page as the DA and the PA, then it means a lot of Zimbabweans are coming back home and then looking at the economic situation here, looking at the political situation here. Yeah, I think it's going to be a disaster, to be very honest. So I just hope that they can agree on a position that is favorable to all, because South Africa is really a key player when it comes to, Southern African politics, and Zimbabwe needs the diplomatic ties that it has with South Africa right now. If they go sideways, it's going to spell disaster for the country. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jessie. I think quite important perspectives to get in terms of how you saw the elections, but also your fears and your worries around what this new regime could signify, not just internally here in South Africa around the positions of migrants, but also the impact it's going to have on other countries, on positions, on countries like Zimbabwe and Swaziland. So thanks for the inputs, and I want to move quickly because I see that our time is a bit moving faster. Comrade Lucian, are you in the house? If you are here, we would want to hear your thoughts on what this moment mean, not just to South Africa, but to the region, particularly given that South Africa has been playing a critical lead role in different parts of the world, but more importantly for us and for the purposes of this discussion on Swaziland and on Zimbabwe. Are we likely to see changes in the approach to those two issues? Are we likely to see changes in the positive direction, or are we likely to see those two issues being parked outside, but also even locally, the issue of migration, the issue of the Zimbabweans and Swazis that are here, and many other foreign nationals that are in South Africa from Mozambique? What kind of positions and approaches are we likely to see? What would this government of national unity have as an impact on some of the issues that have become topical in the lead up to the election, but some of them over the years? Please, if you are in, do come in and let's hear your thoughts on that. Comrade Lucian. SALO team, can you help me? Is Lucian in?
Hi, Mandrazik. Comrade Lucian is not in, but Ribone is in.
Okay.
So I think if you can move to Ribone, that would be great.
Perfect. Comrade Ribone, I'll just transfer those questions to you, but also your reaction to some of the inputs that we have had and your thoughts on this topic.
Montrose, can you just repeat the questions? Because yeah.
Okay. So I was saying that we are at this point where South Africa has a government of national unity that is coming in. We know historically the role that South Africa has played on the case of Swaziland, on the case of Zimbabwe, and other cases like Lesotho, but also other cases beyond this region. And the question was around, are we likely to see changes in approach to these particular issues, particularly Zimbabwe and Swaziland, in terms of how the South African governments deals with the cases, deals with the issues. The question was also around the issue of migration internally in South Africa. Are we likely, what kind of positions are we likely to see from the new South African regime as we try to postulate and get a sense of what is likely to be the impact of this new government on foreign policy issues, particularly Zimbabwe and Swaziland, but also on the migration question inside South Africa.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Monjosi, and good morning to everyone. I'm sorry that I joined a bit late. I was in another meeting. If you look at, at the present moment where we are sitting, around the GNU, yes, the document was signed by different parties, and we've seen in the media how the DA, has also been vocal on the issue of new partners, joining this government of national unity. We've seen the ANC response, but I think what was more interesting for me was the IFP, saying that there needs to be an urgent meeting of the partners, to sit around the table. And which is also a bit worrying that you can't have partners speaking to each other through the media, and not engaging each other, because we will need a stable government, and where people can sit around the table, and discuss issues as they come, because this is a different GNU compared to 1994. 1994 the ANC had won, but because of at the time it was the transition and the stability of the country, that's why we had the GNU. But this time around the ANC gets 50% below, which is 40% that they got. So it will be a very difficult one because yes, while the president has got the prerogative as the president, but it's not business as usual, because now there has to be that consultation, with the members of parliament, or the different parties that are represented in parliament that have joined this GNU. So it's going to be interesting also as we're waiting now for the cabinet to be announced. I'm not sure if it's tomorrow or Sunday, because the consultations now is no longer within the alliance now. It's also including the GNU. So who gets foreign affairs and who gets home affairs, will be very interesting, because as we speak right now on the issues of whether migrants or South Africa's foreign policy, it will depend on also which party gets those ministerial posts, because that might also say bring a new discussion to the table. We know that there's the white paper in parliament, and there's been also outcry around that white paper, that it contradicts our constitution and so forth, on certain things. And the latter speaker spoke about the judgment, around the then the minister, or Motsoaledi, who's still the minister of Home Affairs, regarding the Zimbabweans, that they still need to be in South Africa. You can't just wish them away. So these are things that I think the GNU partners, while they focus on internal domestic issues, they can't shy away also from international issues, looking at eSwatini and Zimbabwe, in terms of the challenges that face those countries when it comes to issues of democracy. But one must applaud the ANC, that they've continued to show maturity, as our democracy matures, because for a ruling party just to accept the outcomes and not want to rig the elections or want to have post-violence, which shows that the ANC, when you look at its partners in the region, they've shown so much maturity, and the ANC being the last one that got independence after its sister parties in the region, one must applaud the ANC for that, that today we have a stable government, we have a rand that is getting stronger, as we saw that the rand to the dollar is sitting at 17 rands. But you know, as you ask your questions, Munjozi, there's going to be a lot of, I think, power struggle within the GNU, and who, because also there's people's egos that I think I'm picking up as this GNU is about to be put in place with, in terms of a cabinet, and the DA, making it clear that there can never be any ministerial posts without them also being consultant, on the different departments, So the ANC, it got 40% and is the one that called everyone to the table after the National Executive Committee meeting. They will have to also be smart how they navigate, under this GNU, but one hopes that we'll see a government that, when it comes to its foreign policy, gives us a direction, But as I said in the last meeting, that where we're sitting, it's the issue of national interest, We need a white paper on foreign policy that these things are not only based on who's the president of the day, because it's clear that moving forward, coalitions or GNU will be part of us, because of how our democracy is maturing, it might be difficult to say in 2029 there might be an outright winner, depending on how the different parties play themselves. But as things stand, this is something that is going to be with us for a very long time. So now there is a need, and I think the civil society also need to take that opportunity to start also speaking about the issue of South Africa's foreign policy, that it needs to be out there. We need to know what actually South Africa stands for, because at times, the government, for an example, will take time to respond to issues like eSwatini, at times. And I mean, we had one government, which was the ANC. When you look at their policies or resolutions of conference and vis-a-vis, sometimes what they do in government is the opposite, and I'm making an example on eSwatini because we have not seen much shift, in terms of holding or engaging with the Swazi government on the political violence that is there, and which has been of great concern. I mean, people in the past few years, we know that around, I think, 2021, a lot of people lost their lives and so forth in Eswatini, but we didn't see much from the South African government, trying to engage at that level, through a special envoy and so forth. So one hopes that this gives South Africans an opportunity to push for this paper on foreign policy, so that it can be clear what brings us together in terms of our national interest, and what is the outlook in terms of foreign policy, because you can't deal with the issue of migrants and not have a clear stance on your foreign policy, because the reality of the matter is that people don't come to South Africa because they just want to come here and have fun. People come to South Africa because of the material conditions that they face in their countries, or the violence that they face in their countries. So this now gives, it's a door, But even now, there's discussions on a national dialogue, a possible national dialogue, and the problem is that with this possible of a national dialogue, what I've picked up is that it's more around people's also personalities. It's more about, the Zuma fight. And I think South Africa, especially politicians, need to move away, especially those in the ANC, to want to centralize everything around Zuma. There's things that this is an era that actually needs critical thinkers, not populist or politics, if we're to take the country forward. And this was what happened this week around the document that was signed. It shows that there's also that lack of critical thinkers, not reading and understanding that Section 24 that Helen Ziller speaks about. So at this point, we need a country that will be engaging outside of political parties, but to say what is in the interest of South Africa, to take South Africa forward, to build the country, but also not forgetting that we've got brothers and sisters in the region who do not enjoy the same democracy that we enjoy in South Africa today, even if after the ruling party, which is a liberation movement, has lost elections, can still have a country that is stable, where the economy is functional, where even business is not really scared about the possible implications, of the outcomes of these elections, because of how different parties were able to come to the table. Even if when you have what they call the so-called black progressive caucus, not being that disruptive, to the status quo in terms of the GNU partners, So, but we really need to push for this paper on foreign policy. And then we will be watching very closely the outcomes of the cabinet, because that also will give us a sense if the ANC ministers retain foreign affairs and home affairs, because this is the same cabinet that passed that white paper, does this give room now to say, let's review, certain things, in terms of our white paper on migrants? I'll end there, Josie.
Thanks, Ron. I think that very important inputs, and I mean, just emphasizing the complexity of the moment we are in, and the challenges that South Africa has to navigate. The importance of applying minds properly to what this moment would mean, but also an opportunity to look at what has been done in the past few years on the white papers, on some of the positions that have been taken, and whether this moment can be used to review some of those decisions and reassert the South African interests, foreign interests and values in terms of how to approach those things around us as South Africa. So quite a very important moment, and thanks for the input, some pointers into what we are likely to see, but also just helping understand that it's not business as usual. It's a critical moment for the country. It's a moment that calls on people to be sober and rational in looking at issues that affect this country. But also the importance of inclusivity and the idea of just the people who occupy some of these key positions is an important aspect, because personalities can also shape discourse and what ultimately happens on critical issues. Thanks, Rubone. And let me check if Lucian is in now. If not, I think when he joins, we'll allow him to give remarks. But I know that it's time for discussions. I saw some comments from Ambassador Zwambila, and I know that a lot of you would have questions. I will hand over this time to my colleague, Fozia, who is going to take us through the sessions, the question and answer sessions, the discussion question. But as Fozia is coming, if Lucian is not in, I would bring back Lwazi Somia to just help us reflect a bit more on this question, react from the inputs we have had. And Fozia, you can then come in. Thank you.
Thanks, Monrodzi. And thank you again to all of the speakers for really valuable contributions and providing strong insights on what this potential, like this government of national unity can, how it can impact the region. And I think Ambassador Zwambila raised quite a few interesting points in the chat, so I'll read that out, following which I will open to the floor for hands. So Ambassador Zambila says that the GNU is just that, legislative frameworks don't change. The president has constitutional powers, no changes in approaches for Zim and Swaziland. Even no changes in Israel, they may throw its toys out of the cart, but Parliament makes rules and manifestos as ANCs. What I don't see is some sort of referee mechanism. Although there are different situations, Mbeki was referee for Zimbabwe GNU. MDC thought that they would get foreign affairs, they ended up with social portfolios. In hindsight, it was good because there was a change in the standard of living for people. In South Africa, political violence is played out in rural areas, councillors and MECs murders pre-election. And I think that those are all valid and valuable points, especially I think if you look at the context of ward council elections or local government elections, you see increasing pockets of violence across the country. So if there's any takers to respond to Ambassador Zwambila's comments, please raise your hand. And then I'm now also taking hands from the floor. Rebone.
Okay, thanks. I think I will, on the last point by Ambassador Zwambili, when I meant the violence, I mean, if you look at compared to what happens in eSwatini or in Zimbabwe, we don't, because mainly the violence that happens is internally where people are just fighting for positions. But I don't know of MECs that have been killed, but at local government, we know, I mean, a lot of councillors, especially in KwaZulu-Natal, we know in Mpumalanga and other provinces, you know, but it's mainly, has always been for internal people fighting for power, not the violence where people are beaten up by the police or the military. And that's what I'm talking about when I speak about the violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebone. Then we have Miriam. Would you like to come in?
Thanks, Fazi. And good morning to everyone. Yeah, I think Rebone has touched on the issue that I was a little bit uncomfortable with. Not that one wants to downplay the issue of violence, but relatively speaking, South Africa should be commended for having conducted the elections, and not just these ones, throughout, that are relatively free of violence. I mean, throughout the media before the elections, there was people were saying there's going to be violence in South Africa, and we all know that did not happen. So I'm not saying I'm downplaying the issue of political killings, but to be honest and frank, this is not what happened during these elections. But also, I wanted to hear more about, the lessons that have been learned. Of course, in the previous discussions, we were taken through some of the lessons, also the capacity of the IEC, but also, what are the things that can be commended, but what are the things that should be improved, especially as we go towards local government elections. But this government of national unity, I think there should be more engagement on what has been put out there, both by the ANC and others. I think there should be better understanding on it, and there should be more discussions on it, and including the call for a national dialogue, and maybe an understanding of what could have what could have made it important for the president to call for the for the national dialogue to take place. So yeah, there's a lot to be learned. These are interesting times, and maybe in the follow-up discussions, we should ask ourselves as to whether South Africa did it even have ANC what was it supposed to do? Did it have any choice around the formation of the government of national unity? You know, what could have been another option? So yeah, those are my contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamadine. I also see Loazi's hand and then Youngerson's hands. Can you please come in? Loazi, then Youngerson.
The problem with speaking after Miriam is that her foresight and intelligence always foreshadows what I was preparing to say. And part and parcel, especially touching on the national dialogue, because point 12 of the statement of intent by the Governor of National Unity Partners says parties commit to an all-inclusive national dialogue process with parties, civil society, labor, business, and other sectors to discuss these other critical challenges facing the nation. The national dialogue process will seek to develop a national social compact that enables the country to meet the aspirations of the National Development Plan. So it's clear that all the Governor of National Unity Partners see the necessity of this national dialogue process. But when we compare it to the national dialogue process in countries such as Swaziland, we see regional actors reneging on the necessity of a national dialogue. Now, my question will come to Comrade Mary, especially for the situation on the national dialogue. What could be the lessons learned from this call for a national dialogue process in the situation of Swaziland? And what could be the potential entry points that could lead to a more regional, citizens-led regional dialogue on the future that we want in terms of not only the democratic elections, but governance and other aspects around development within SADC? Thank you so much, Fawzia.
Thank you, Loazi. Youngerson?
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. So I think I came a bit late, so forgive me if I said something that has already been answered, but I felt like I also maybe need to just pause. It could be remarks or questions, I don't know. But I feel like the issue of the GN in South Africa actually has got several ramifications for the regions, especially the SADC, is given that the ANC and the Democratic Alliance actually have got a different foreign policy, especially with regards to Zimbabwe. Because I think colleagues will remember that soon after the Zimbabwean elections in 2023, which SADC actually condemned through their SEC, through their reports and stuff. But it was actually the South African government through the ANC that actually rubber-stamped the elections and things proceeded like that. So, but after that, also the DA through its shadow Foreign Affairs, Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Emapue, they actually released a statement with regards to that elections, opposing also the position of the ANC. So it could quite be interesting to see that since they are now in the same government, is the government of South Africa going to take the same approach with regards to Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwean issue, given that it has got serious consequences for South Africa in terms of immigration. Although I've seen Helen Zille talking about the issue of extending or giving ZEPs to the Zimbabweans that are already in South Africa, but it's also something that actually impacts in terms of immigration. So it will be quite interesting to see how it's going to be actually be handled, given that also the Secretary, the Foreign Affairs Secretary for South Africa, Naledi Pandor, is leaving office, and there could be a new person. We don't know, maybe it's going to come from the DA or it's going to come from the ANC, who's going to influence it. And also, on a more international stage, there's also a petition that is already at the ICJ, which is to do with the conflict between Palestine and Israel, that South Africa is a part of it. So on that regard, again, the DA also disagree with the ANC on that regard. They think that South Africa should actually more focus on Zimbabwe, but I'm sure that because the DA is also a right-wing party, that also going to more align with the Western side. So it's also going to be actually quite interesting. And also on the same strength on the issue of Ukraine and Russia, given that the DA already took a position of Ukraine, and Russia is also in the BRICS that South Africa belongs to. So it's quite interesting how they are going to handle the foreign policy, especially that these are two parties that seem to disagree on every level of the foreign policy. But as a student of international relations, I think, foreign policy are actually so rigid, it's difficult to change them, but it's going to be interesting. I think it's something that I would also want to pose in this dialogue series to understand what other colleagues think of how this is going to play out during the GNES. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I please call on the speakers to respond to some of the inputs from the floor? I know there was a question directed specifically at Mary, and then if other speakers can also come in after.
Hello, could I have the question again? Sorry, I'm in a noisy place, so it sometimes drowns out the sound.
Oh, Mary, the question was in relation to President Ramaphosa's call for a national dialogue, essentially, which includes civil society, communities, labor, trade union movement, etc., etc. Could you please unpack what have been the relevant calls coming from Swaziland concerning a national dialogue? What is the difference between Ramaphosa's President Ramaphosa's initiative, along with how can we learn from this initiative initiated by the Government of National Unity Partners to essentially build on a national compact in line with the form of national development plan. Over to you, Mary.
Thanks, Lwazi. President Ramaphosa's call for a national dialogue actually went in tandem with the calls by civil society, the mass democratic movement generally, inside Swaziland with regard to the type of the nature and process of the dialogue. Because the first point in the 5-point plan, which is our roadmap, is that we want an inclusive political dialogue. Not only must it be inclusive of all stakeholders, but it must be neutrally mediated. And therefore, we saw SADC through the organ troika, through President Ramaphosa, possibly playing that neutral role in ensuring that the dialogue happens inside Swaziland. And the call for a dialogue have not diminished. They continue, despite the fact that the government has taken very robust steps to try to give the impression that everything is back to normal inside the country. And what we have seen with what South Africa is going through right now, the transition, the fact that you've got 3 political parties coming together to form a government, is exactly what we have been telling our government and the king, to say a dialogue can only happen between persons that hold opposing views. It cannot be, you cannot call a dialogue of persons that have the same views as a national dialogue, which is what they seek to achieve through the dialogue that they supposedly call at Sibaya, where they say Swazis come together and form national policy and debate issues and create a roadmap for the country, which is untrue, because the persons that attend these things are those that tend to be mostly loyalists and traditionalists. So I think we have a lot to learn from South Africa at this point. But again, we're only going to be able to see how well it will function as time goes on, because for now it looks like there's consensus over how to approach things and processes and issues like that. But it is when the processes are unfolding and when they are beginning to implement the government policies, and when the cabinet is now appointed, we will see whether the differences will play out in such a way that it becomes unstable. But we honestly believe that South Africa has taken the most positive step we've ever seen in any of our African countries when it comes to sharing of power and transition from one form of government to another, first from upper state to democracy, and now a strengthening of that democracy And the fact that, the people are willing to sit at the table together despite their opposing views is a positive for us. And it is what we are looking at to inform the kind of discussions that we will have to inform the nature and processes of the national dialogue that we will have inside our country, perhaps in the next few years to come.
Thank you so much. Can I call on GC and Ribone and Chidi, if you'd like to come in as well, just to respond to some of the comments made from the floor.
Right, I'll come in. Just starting with Ma'am Miriam. Indeed, lessons must be learned in terms of based on the IEC, that they really need to train their agents, because there was also a lot of complaints in the different polling stations, and that's why I remember some people had been advocating that SATU must not be involved, and they were saying that it's funny that they wanted SATU out, but now the problem that you have people who are so inexperienced, so the IEC needs to start preparing now for 2026 local government elections, because that's not also going to be an easy election. It's going to be a very interesting one, because this one, I think it was just what you call this word. Okay, I forgot the word, but yeah. So they need to prepare for 2026 to make sure, because a lot of people that I've spoken to in different political parties, they have vested interest to be councillors, and you might have some people also in the ANC who have not made it in certain processes. They're going to go and want to contest, at a local government. So the IEC needs to have very well-trained personnel. On the GNU, I think it's more of I think also a technical thing, and we need leaders, as I said, people who are critical thinkers, because I'll just make comparison to the Germans. I mean, they do these coalitions negotiations for 3 to 6 months at some time, because they make sure that they're detailed, in terms of what are they getting themselves into, or what will be their priorities, so that when they say we're forming this government of nation, we're forming a coalition as the German government with these parties, they can then take out even that document, to show what are the key priorities. And these are some of the things that moving forward we'll have to look into, and even there must be, this also gives also a chance, to review certain things in the constitution about the 14 days of forming a government and so forth, because at the time when this constitution was drafted, no one anticipated that today will be in this situation where a party gets below 50%, so there needs to also be some of the things that are looked into the constitution to talk to us based on today's time. On the issue of the formation of the different options that the ANC had, I mean, the ANC came out and said, we are going for a government of national unity. We're inviting all the parties. But it seems like certain parties wanted the ANC to come and beg them, And when they realized that this train is moving on the eve of swearing in of MPs, they start to regroup, have a meeting in some hotel in Cape Town, and the ANC can be blamed for that, because the country also needs to move forward, and if the DA was able to come to the table, and the IFP was able to come to the table. I mean, we've seen in KwaZulu-Natal, for an example, where MK stood IFP up, when they were supposed to meet, they didn't show up. That shows that some parties were playing games, and that's why today MK got 45%, but they're not the ones in government in that province, because of the games. We know that NFP met with Jacob Zuma the night before also, the election of the speaker and the premier in that legislature, So as things stand, the argument of the ANC was supposed to go with EFF because, black parties must unite and so forth. But if we look at the elections outcomes, even the EFF declined also, so that shows that South Africans is not like they are really happy with the EFF, how they've been behaving in parliament over the past, or since they were in parliament since 2014. So those are some of the things that I think this, for me personally, this I think also gives also the opportunity for that accountability that we've been missing in government. I don't know, someone is not muted. Yeah, this also gives
Sorry about that.
okay, this also gives
Bonnie,
that,
if you can kindly start also closing, because
Yeah.
we are in our last 10 minutes, and then we can also move to the other speakers to close.
I think the final one is on the BRICS. By the way, the DA at the last conference supports BRICS, and they have made it clear that even if, and this was building up to this election, that even if they would have been government, they would still continue with the BRICS partners. For them, they see them as a strategic bloc. Thank you.
Thank you, Ribone. If you can move to Matshidiso, and then to Janet, and sorry, not Janet, Jessie, and then to Mary for the closing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I guess I will round up and close off. I'll make them closing remarks. So I've been a little bit quiet because I'm just learning a lot and engaging and realizing just how, while we have come so far, we still have a lot of work to do. And it's just really important to make sure that we don't lose or regress or lose the work that we've already done, entering this uneasy or a moment of anxiety in our country. I also think that, in some ways, political participation is very important, but I also think that there's quite a disconnect often between the promises of political parties, and I'm not criticizing one in particular. It's actually, I think, the political system in its entirety and the implementation of the promises that are proposed. And one of the reasons, so what political parties say and then what they actually fight for, what they vote for when they're elected, sometimes or often actually is not aligned. And a big part of it, the lack of implementation or the difference in that, is because the economic policy that underpins the political promises is at odds with it. So I think one of the previous speakers mentioned, I think said something about, I'll use an example of the ANC talking left, but acting right. And I think a part of it is the political system and the economic system who report the people of the country dominate the political system because they're in the majority, but the economic system, a lot of the reporting back, Treasury has to report back to the IMF, the World Bank, more international finance institutions, and the OECD, which have differing perspectives of what advancing our country. So all of this to say that yes, there's the political, and it might make us feel anxious at what's the next step. But I just encourage everyone to just look at the economic policies and to continue to participate in parliament, like looking at what, tracking the parliamentary perspectives and reaching out to the political parties that you voted for if they contradict what they promised, because we need to hold everyone accountable, because that's one of the most powerful ways to build a capable state and continue to advance the democratic project. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rudiso, and I think very valuable insights, and I think a lot of learnings that can be taken across the region. Also because we in sort of uncharted territory as a country, and then as a region as well. And so I think a very useful precedent is being set, and I think as civil society, to hold our government accountable, or to hold this GNU accountable, and to be consistently involved in various processes to ensure that accountability is held, I think is a very important point. If I can please move to Mary, and then after that, Jessie, please. And then, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Fauzia. I'll start by thanking SALO as usual for hosting this dialogue series to give a voice to human rights defenders and activists across the region to discuss issues of pertinent importance in their countries. And then to say that as citizens of Swaziland, what we will do is we will watch closely what's happening in South Africa to draw some lessons from that to enable us to also prepare ourselves for the national dialogue or for any transitions that may come forward with regard to the system of governance in the country and change to a democratic dispensation. So thank you very much. And we also always ask that you continue providing the solidarity and support to us, and also for those that may have contact with persons of people that we could approach in terms of our lobbying and advocacy. Please do share those people that could influence the policy changes inside Parliament, you know, to inform the foreign policy. Please do let us know, share the contact, share information with us. We'll be very much grateful. Thank you so much, comrades. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Miri. If I can move to Jessie.
Thank you so much, Fauza. In my concluding remarks, all I can say is that I think the South African election has been pivotal, considering that the ANC has always secured a 50+ majority since 1994. So there's a ripple effect that can be felt across Africa, considering that South Africa is the biggest economy that we have on the continent. And in Zimbabwe, we're on the edge of our seats right now, you know, waiting for the announcement of the new cabinet, as well as just thinking about the ANC's loss of parliamentary seats and how this potentially might strain diplomatic ties between Zimbabwe and South Africa. And then now that the DA is in the picture, is there going to be a complete change in the ANC's foreign policy? Is it going to remain the same? It's something that we're thinking about. And if there is, how will this pan out for the +2 million Zimbabweans that are living in South Africa? Then on the other hand, I also think that on women's participation, I think both Zimbabwe and South Africa have a lot of work to do, because we're seeing a regression in gender equality. South Africa's democracy is progressing, but Zimbabwe's democracy is actually backsliding, and then the regression is even worse. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done when it just comes to the participation of women in politics and decision making. But all in all, I feel that the South African election is a great example for Zimbabwe. And I think that with the 2028 elections coming up, we definitely have a lot to learn. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jessie, and to all of us speakers. I think really making insightful comments and inputs, and I think about how this GNU will impact regional dynamics and what that looks like for South Africa's relationships with its SADC partners. I just want to check if Professor Brian Raftopoulos is in. If not, then I'm happy to close. And so just to thank all of our participants, our speakers, and then to SALO staff, and then also for your generous engagement and your contributions. And then I'd also like to thank our developmental partner, OPC. So thank you to all for your insightful contributions.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.